Archaeologists made a 14,400-year-old discovery in Jordan that radically rewrites human history. In the Black Desert of Jordan, archaeologists spent several years investigating a site called Shubayqa 1. They believed that the people who lived there could reveal more about one of humanity's greatest innovations. Searching the ruins of a fireplace, they found the ashes of an ancient meal. Its contents may turn traditional ideas about the development of agriculture on their head. The earliest humans were hunter-gatherers. They foraged for edible plants and hunted animals for sustenance. As the seasons changed, so did the availability of food. People would have to migrate to find new sources of nourishment. This way of living spanned the larger portion of human history. Agriculture and the sedentary life that accompanies it are relatively new inventions. There are a few hunter-gatherer societies still in existence. They include the San in the southern part of Africa, the Mbuti in Central Africa and the Copper Inuit in the Arctic. The areas where these people live are not good places to grow crops or keep animals. Their lifestyle has been studied to help understand what ancient hunter-gatherer societies may have been like. Every hunter-gatherer community is different. They do, however, share some similar traits. Most are quite small, with just a few dozen members. Often, the labor in hunter-gatherer societies is divided. Hunting tends to be the province of men. Women are in charge of foraging. Other than gender and age, there is very little differentiation between the position and roles of members of the society. There is no one moment that can be pointed to as the beginning of human agriculture. The transition from hunting and gathering to settled farming was probably a gradual thing. Several different societies around the world began to practice agriculture independently of each other. Many great civilizations of the ancient world, including ancient Egypt, Sumer in Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley of northern India, all had sophisticated agricultural practices. Evidence suggests that some of the first steps towards agriculture were taken after the Pleistocene Ice Age ended. That would have been around 11,700 years ago. It marked a notable change in the climate, which in turn affected ecosystems around the world. People of the time may have been managing non-domesticated plants and animals in a forerunner of what would become farming. Hunting and gathering was a difficult way to live. It was a constant struggle to find enough to eat. Cultivating their own crops may have given early farmers confidence that they would not run out of food during the lean seasons. Ground, baked food provides more energy than a raw plant, but that means you need to know how to manipulate the crop. Farmed cows and sheep provided stable sources of milk and meat that were not guaranteed from wild animals. Southwest Asia, or the Near East, was one of the first places to see agriculture advance. It is thought plants were first being domesticated around 12,000 years ago, with animals following around 2,000 years after that. Between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago, people in East Asia and the Americas also began to cultivate different crops. Wheat and barley were prominent in Southwest Asia, rice dominated in East Asia, and squash appeared in what are now Mexico and Peru. As former hunter-gatherers settled in one place, they constructed homes that would last for extended periods of time. Populations increased. In Southwest Asia, farming villages were being built 10,000 years ago. This part of the world is known as the Fertile Crescent. It would become Mesopotamia, birthplace of one of humanity's first great civilizations. Across the Americas, different forms of agriculture were practiced dependent on different environments. As there were no animals suited for pulling a plow, farming technology was different to that in other parts of the world. The Inca built terraced fields in Peru, while the Maya and Aztecs used complex irrigation systems to support their societies. Corn-maize was the most common crop, but this is also where potatoes, tomatoes and peppers first grew. China also saw the early development of farming communities. There's evidence that the Chinese grew rice, millet, hemp and Chinese cabbage, some as long as 8,000 years ago. Paddy fields would eventually be invented to provide the ideal wetland environment for growing rice. Similar crops would eventually be grown in what are now Korea and Japan. One people that lived during the transition to agriculture in Southwest Asia were the Natufians. This hunter-gatherer culture was mainly based in the area's Mediterranean woodlands. Shubayqa 1 is the first Natufian site outside of this core zone to be thoroughly explored by archaeologists. It is proving a treasure trove of new information about hunter-gatherer food habits. The part of eastern Jordan known as the Black Desert is called that because of the black basalt stones that make up much of the landscape. It's home to several areas of archaeological interest. Shubayqa 1 is just one important site. It's located near the border with Syria, around 82 miles from the Jordan's capital city of Amman. Another site in the Black Desert, called Jebel Kerma, has been studied extensively because of the art found on rocks nearby. The inscriptions are around 2,000 years old. They suggest that the desert was not always an arid and inhospitable place. Indeed, it used to have a significant population. Shubayqa 1 predates this art and proves the Natufians were in the area even earlier. Shubayqa 1 is part of the Harat el-Shama volcanic field. This field spans parts of Syria and Saudi Arabia as well as Jordan, making it the largest volcanic field in Arabia. The total area is more than 19,000 square miles. It's the source of the local basalt, a rock that can form in lava flows. When the Natufians were living at Shubayqa 1 over 14,000 years ago, it was 4,000 years before farming became widespread in the area. They did, however, experience a more sedentary lifestyle than the cultures that preceded them. As the excavations at Shubayqa show, this had a profound impact on their diet. Shubayqa 1 was first discovered in the 1990s. Between 2012 and 2015, an international team of researchers conducted a series of digs at the site. With the support of Jordan's Department of Antiquities, archaeologists from the University of Copenhagen led the work. Other experts involved came from the University of Cambridge and University College London, UCL. There were probably multiple buildings at Shubayqa 1 once, but the researchers' focus was on the two that were best preserved. They were stone structures, made of the basalt that is common in the area. Discoveries inside these buildings included tools and animal bones. A human skeleton was found in one wall. The buildings also had their own fireplaces, which proved another source of evidence on Natufian life. Like the buildings, these fireplaces were formed with basalt boulders. They were about 3 feet across. Radiocarbon dating of the ashes inside showed they were from the Natufian era. Rather than cleaning them out, the Natufians had just left them behind. The researchers could analyze the ashes to see what the Natufian had been cooking and eating. Shubayqa 1 is situated next to a mudflat. During the time of the Natufians, it was probably a wet land. Today's arid conditions may make it difficult to grow crops, but it would have been different back then. Some produce, such as wheat, already grew naturally in the area. It was, however, still thousands of years before it was thought agriculture began in Southwest Asia. That's what makes what was discovered at the site so special. The researchers took 49 samples from the fireplace to be analyzed by the most advanced microscopy. What they found was that, despite not being farmers, the Natufians had somehow developed all the processes necessary to create their own bread. Today, bread can be found all around the world and forms an essential part of many diets. Despite this, little is known about its early development. It was thought that it didn't become a dietary staple until Neolithic farmers could rely on their own cereal cultivation to help them produce it. The fact the Natufians were making it without growing their own crops has fascinated researchers. Shubayqa 1 is not the first time prehistoric bread has been investigated. New technology, however, means scientists can examine its composition with more accuracy than ever before. Samples were sent to UCL, where they could be looked at with a method called scanning electron microscopy, SEM. It's hoped this technique can one day be used to reanalyze remains from previously discovered sites. Meanwhile, one of the scientists, Laura Gonzalez Carretero's area of expertise is prehistoric bread. Consequently, it was her task to investigate the ashes. However, that wasn't as easy as it sounds. She had to establish criteria to separate bread from other ancient cereal products such as porridge before she could even begin. The microscopy allowed her to see the particles and microstructures inside the remains. She could then compare them to the bread produced experimentally for the study. The most basic forms of bread only need flour and water. This is then baked with dry heat. The inclusion of gluten or other protein in the flour gives it its shape and texture. As part of a human diet, bread provides a range of nutrients, which include iron, magnesium and B vitamins. It's also a good source of carbohydrates and fiber. It would be a good way for hunter-gatherers make up for the lack of calories in the raw plants that they consumed. Carratero needed to see if the samples matched her definition of bread. The microscopy revealed that the ashes contained a mix of Ian corn wheat, oats, barley and club rush tubers. Of those, 24 samples fit Carratero's criteria. The plant matter would have been ground together to make a fine flour of surprisingly high quality. The bread would have been unleavened, made without yeast or any other kind of raising agent. It was a flatbread, probably like a modern pita in appearance. Club rush tubers are a type of aquatic papyrus. They were the most frequently appearing plant in the fireplaces. According to the study's first author and botanical expert Amaya Aarons-Otegui, the tubers on their own taste a little sweet and a bit salty and had a gritty texture, but maybe that's because we didn't clean them well enough. On their own, the club rush tubers would have produced a brittle bread that easily crumbled. The wheat would have added gluten, which would have changed the texture of the dough. It would have become more elastic. This would have allowed the Natufians to bake it more easily. As there was no evidence of ovens at Shubayqa 1, the bread was probably baked on a hot stone next to the fire or in the ashes themselves. The ability to bake without an oven is likely one reason flatbreads were popular in the ancient world. Another is that they are easy to stack, making transportation and storage easy. It's not the first time historical unleavened flatbreads have been found. There are Roman and even Neolithic sites in both Europe and Turkey that have revealed similar remains. The oldest of these, though, was 9,100 years old. The bread in Jordan predates this significantly. The archaeologists were not entirely surprised by their discovery. Previous explorations of Natufian sites have revealed ancient grinding tools and sickle blades made of flint. These suggested that the Natufians were interacting with and manipulating plants. Now the researchers finally have evidence to support their theories. One food technologist not involved in the study is Antonella Pasqualone. She is an expert in the science behind cereals, and bread has been the focus of several studies she has authored. She agrees that flatbreads may have been an ideal way to bridge between hunter-gatherers and stable farmers because of their advantages over other types of bread. Another scientist who was not involved in the study is Patrick McGovern from the Biomolecular Archaeology Laboratory for Cuisine, Fermented Beverages and Health at the University of Pennsylvania. His expertise is ancient beer. He considered it likely that if the Natufians were manipulating cereals for bread, then they could make beer too. Since then, a Natufian cave in Israel has revealed evidence of a 13,000-year-old brewery. As creating bread is a labor-intensive process, the Natufians must have had good reason to make the effort. They would have had to dehusk and grind the cereals, then knead and bake the dough. Something about this was special. It's possible that the lengthy production process felt necessary because they wanted to impress special guests. The importance of bread, even in the modern world, is about much more than its nutritional value. Otegui thinks that bread has this additional powerful place in contemporary culture with links to religion and important ceremonies. She considers the bread an important link between modern people and their ancestors, part of a shared cultural history. To see the symbolic value given to bread in modern society, you only have to look at the Christian communion. This is one of the most important ceremonies in Christianity, and it involves eating a piece of bread as well as drinking a cup of wine. The wine represents the blood of Jesus Christ, while the bread represents his body. It's a tradition that remembers how Jesus was said to have sacrificed his body and blood for humanity. The bread and wine of the Last Supper can trace their symbolism even further back, to the Jewish festival of Pesach or Passover. Jesus and his disciples were also remembering how God rescued the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Even today, Jewish people honor Passover as one of their holiest festivals. One way in which they do so by eating matzah, a kind of unleavened bread. If bread was important enough to the Natufians, it may even have motivated them to start growing their own cereals. Agriculture may have started because they wanted to produce more bread. Investigating whether the making of bread was a factor in beginning to cultivate cereals is one of the next aims of the researchers. For now, they have published their findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The Danish Council for Independent Research has awarded more money to continue the research. The experts want to further explore early plant and animal consumption in light of their newest discoveries. This includes identifying which plants were preferred for bread making and whether they were the plants that would go on to be cultivated by farmers. Otaegui also wants to recreate the Natufian bread. This will involve working with modern chefs. The first step was making flour with club rush tubers, but initial results didn't seem suited to modern taste buds. It may take some adjustment for today's humans to eat such an ancient recipe. Otaegui still sees it as another way to connect with our Natufian ancestors. McGovern agrees that studying ancient people is fascinating because of the ways they are similar to us, as much if not more than the ways in which they differ. It seems that the bread discovery may not just tell us more about agricultural history, but about humanity as a species and how we have developed into who we are now.